There's the old saying that humanity will make progress after exhausting all the alternatives. And it's totally true, is that as long as there's great people working on those problems that you're talking about, we're going to make progress. There's people who will unintentionally stand in the way, who might be the realists. They might actually say, you know what, that thing that you're trying to do is going to be so expensive that it's going to break your company. And they might be right.
Welcome to the Enterprise Intelligence Podcast with ShinyDoc CEO Jason Cassidy and VP of Customer Success Davey Slimman.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Steve. Welcome again,
How are you
Davey.
guys doing this week?
Going great.
Yeah, really great. I was just reminded next on Monday, I think it's like President's Day, and it's also Family Day here in Ontario. So every once in a while, a long weekend.
This one totally snuck up on me, and the only reason I even was mildly aware of it is they propped a PD day right in front of it as well for my kids, so my kids get a 4-day weekend. And that was when I sort of clued in and thought, oh yeah, I guess it's a stat on Monday, so it should be good. Yeah,
cool. So you guys will be doing lots of exploding kittens. And
it'll be a day in front of Netflix, I'm sure, if it's lousy weather. We'll see what the weather's doing. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So this week I wanted to jump in. One thing that I've been drawing attention to for a long time is like some traditional ways of doing business with content. We're finding what's cool is I think I have to stop talking about it because everybody gets it now. Like there's additional things that need to be done, and lots of organizations, even big vendors, are now approaching it in a way that it's like, yep, putting it in the right spot is important. Making sure it's in the right spot is important. However, now understanding and how it aligns with your business is clearly the most important thing. So authors and all that. So that's not my topic, but I just wanted to kind of preface it with that. So, but there are additional things. Like if you approach ShinyDocs, then we are going to, just like virus scanning, understand your data nonstop. And then you will be able to take action on the data if you'd like. You can, of course, service things like DSIR or privacy requests. So it's new. So the first topic is how to approach a project when you don't know what to do. You know mostly what the outcome is that you need. You need to be compliant with privacy law. You need, and this is a tough one, to be cyber secure, because there's no such thing as pure security or perfect security. So you got to decide where you're going to end up on the gradient. And when it comes to things like if you just search on the web and say, how do I start a project when I don't know exactly what to do? There is, and I'm not going to name the website, but a very popular website that a lot of people do look for business stuff on there. And it has, in my opinion, exactly the wrong advice. And it vaguely hints at the right advice. And then this is something that we discovered in doing software projects years ago, the right advice. And I'll say the wrong one, like it's define the project scope, research and gather information. And I'm literally reading it from here. Create the project plan, identify the necessary resource, assign tasks and delegate responsibilities, monitor progress, and make adjustments. That's the most important thing. Like it should be highlighted, bold, and in 72-point font. And then celebrate your success was step 7. And it sounds a lot like we're building I need to build a bridge and I need this many tons of concrete and this much rebar and all that. It sounds like an engineering task, which a lot of these projects are not. So I'll throw it to you, Davey, and say, I think you know where I'm hinting at as to the right approach, but how much is that part of the zeitgeist? This traditional approach versus what we think it might
Well,
be a better
I'm
approach.
chuckling because you pointed out as you described, the classic, and I don't want to pick on project managers or PMPs or anything like that. Wonderful people, every one of them. But you touched on something that has kind of been driving me crazy for almost my entire career, which is, the templated approach to creating a project comes with so many assumptions that are often shown to be incorrect. Put a list of all the tasks that you're going to need to do. What if you don't know what those are? Like the classic project template that you kind of outlined there assumes a lot, and one of the things that it assumes is that people know what they're doing, or that they know what they need to do, or that they know even what kinds of questions to ask. And so, I really liked when you talked about the starting, at least in your thinking with the outcome, right? So the outcome, maybe you've been given a direction from your leadership team, or maybe what the outcome is that you're going to be driving towards. Certainly, I would counsel people who are approaching these types of projects. You talked about all the these steps that you go through. I think it's kind of an older model that you're describing there that doesn't really work as well as something more agile. And I'm using agile in a small a agile kind of way here. That is to say, to be iterative and purposeful in your choices about the project stages that you're in, and to essentially to start with small manageable bits rather than these enormous projects that often have a giant laundry list of things to be achieved. What you can do with a more agile approach to these projects is you can get kind of recurring successive wins quickly and build and build and build and build. And the great irony of this is that it actually ends up usually being a better experience for for all the stakeholders. They get, rather than some project that's going to go on for 1,000 years and never end, and no users or stakeholders get any outcomes that they're looking for. The users and the stakeholders get kind of a continuous delivery of new capabilities or improvements if you take on kind of a more agile approach. And so, the template that you described with the big long list of tasks that go on for miles, I think people are wise to figure out ways to move past that. I don't know if you wanted to add to that or.
Yeah, it's because I think of like building
Right.
a home. It's pretty well established that you have to do everything everywhere all at once. So you're doing all of it. Well, you dig a hole, you pour a foundation, you start doing the framing, and then the electricians
Right.
come in and then they run wires. And like it's pretty pretty task oriented. There's no variance here. You're going to do 16-inch centers
Right.
on studs. Like just this is how you
Right.
do it. The rectangles that make up the rooms, or maybe you can add some 45-degree angles in there to make it
Mm-hmm.
funky, but it's pretty practical and obvious how it fits together. And generally you end up with a house that hopefully doesn't leak and doesn't fall over very
Right.
easily. That's not how a creative
No.
project that's never been done by your organization before goes. So the idea of doing everything everywhere all at once should be
Yeah.
scary. So your project plan itself should be stating, in my opinion, here's the big goals. The project plan itself is we are going to be able to service privacy requests
Yep.
and laws. We are going to identify the information that might be a security risk. Then we're going to do some storage optimization. That's the task list, quote unquote. And then each agile iteration is, okay, what's the highest priority, best thing
Right.
that we can do to get some privacy compliance? And it may be, sadly for me, like for Shiny Docs, it may actually just be the privacy
Right.
request tracking. Use a traditional
Mm-hmm.
workflow tool, and there's amazing new tools coming out that are explicit for this task. It's do
Yeah.
that first, make it really good. And then, okay, now that we're tracking the requests really well, now how do you fill those orders? How do you find
Mm-hmm.
that information? Okay, now let's spend an iteration on that. So, but if you chase two rabbits saying we're going to do request tracking and finding the information and remediating the information as project
Mm-hmm.
zero in this, it's harder to get to do a complete job of that than the
Yeah, and
agile
I don't
approach.
know whether you would agree with this, but one of the things that I've certainly observed over the years in large scale organizations, enterprise level organizations, is a real diversity of sophistication through the different components that need to be done, right? So, to your point about all of these different sets of all these different let's call them workflows for now. I can't think of a better word, but I'll think of one at 3 a.m. But think of all the different workflows that have to happen in order to get through to the outcome that you're looking for. What I've seen a lot of is organizations that do really, really well of some of them, but just terribly of others. And so there's an unevenness to the whole thing as well. And I think, one of the things that this more iterative approach that you and I are talking about here really lends itself well to is identifying and picking out which ones are we doing pretty well, which ones are we not doing very well at. And maybe you focus in on the areas where, there really needs to be some attention given to it, and you start small and start iterating on improving that. So you take something that your business was not especially great at, and you focus in on it and kind of tighten that up, and bit by bit by bit, brick by brick, you end up kind of closing up some of those holes in your organization, and you have something resembling a better total workflow to the outcome that you want faster. Rather than, I think, what some organizations used to do, which is blow up the whole thing, create some giant projects. It's like, no, like let's keep the parts that are actually working okay. You don't need to blow up the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think this is the first full generation of management that is going to be open to this idea. I know when I started back in high tech and software back in the 90s, like commercially working for real companies doing that, they were not accepting of that. They're like, Jason, when is the deadline? Here's the 1,200 page specification. Tell me when it's going to be done. And, like you'd eyeball it. You'd write down a number on every page. You'd add up the pages, and then you'd say, I think it's this. And then it was hard to explain to management. It's like, okay, we've started, and you guys are agonizing over every step here. Management, you're being agile. You're saying, well, maybe we should do it this way. Maybe we're doing it that way. Yet you're still holding me to account of, well, you said it would be done in 1,200 days or whatever. And it's like, so you can't.
I think you're right about generationally. That's something that is, gone by the wayside. I think thankfully, like this is a better way, particularly as the both micro and macro climate changes within and outside an organization, economically, organizationally, these projects that are 18, 24 months long. 2 years in the life of a company it can be a long time, and a lot of things can change during that time. So, including the priorities of the company, the operating principles of the company can change pretty significantly. So, it makes sense that we would move to a more nimble model. And jumping back, this is going to sound anecdotal, but I think that's okay here. How many times have you finished a project and, maybe it limps over the finish line and everybody kind of has a, yay, we did it, but nobody's really that thrilled because it was a mess and it finally is over. And then anecdotally, you hear from stakeholders or from users that are like, yeah, it's done, but the old thing that we did, actually parts of that were pretty good, and now we wrecked all that. Like we used to be able to do it this way, we used to be able to do it that way, and and I always used to kind of roll my eyes at that a little bit, because I always thought, well, these are people that are just resisting change or resisting progress, and they're holding things back. But as I get older, I'm starting to think, that voice of the stakeholder, of the user that says, actually, what, we did this one part, this thing, we used to do that actually pretty well, and you just blew it up and created this new thing, and the new thing isn't as good sometimes.
Yeah, it's and I don't want to introduce this as a topic, but so I'll just kind of hope that I'll hang it out there as a statement that maybe is true. It's something that I remember saying. I was consulting with an organization that was building a brand new project, and I'm not going to say who it is, but right now that project is making $20 million a year for that company. It's great. And the advice that I gave on this exact topic was, we are not getting to a finish line here. Okay. You are getting to the start line. building the software and then testing the software and then validating it and then deploying it to production, blah, blah, blah. You're while you feel like you're staggering over a finish line, you're only just getting to the start line. It is the iterations with the end users in pleasing the outcome is how you approach the finish line. And in a sense, that was discouraging to the team. But it sets the tone. And it's like, and like I kind of decorated it with, you got to find ways of finding joy in the journey. You know, like if you don't like going to the gym, then you're not going to like being a professional athlete because it's mostly about doing the reps and going to the gym. So anyway,
I love it.
It's a topic, but I think
it does for sure. Yeah, no, I love it. Now I'm really torn. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say,
so I'm really torn about I've got a couple topics and I'm kind of torn as to which one might be a better fit, because I think they could both we could make both of them kind of connect. And, you know, I know that the goal of this, of these sessions is not to do specific book reviews, but I'm going to introduce here. I'm going to just put it up on the thing, and this book that I've been reading, and I'm not done it, so this won't count as a proper book review. It's a book called Subtract: The Untapped Science of Less by Lady Klotz. And it's really interesting. It's not really a business book. It's not really a book about information management at all, but it's a book about how human beings we're kind of weirdly hardwired. Whenever we try to solve a problem or achieve an outcome or get to some goal, we're weirdly, at least modern humans, seem to be hardwired to add things in order to solve a problem. I got to add something. I've got to add a feature. I've got to hire more people. I've got to grow some capability. And then, you know, when you think about consumerism itself, it's all about adding stuff, right? The book has a number of examples that are kind of funny about this, and talks about, you know, this experiment that was done with subjects where they were given these little engineering experiment, given these little Lego towers of uneven heights, and they had to build some stability into it. And 100% of the people, in order to build stability into this little structure, added blocks to the shorter tower to build greater sort of stability into it. And the author's premise is that not really enough time and energy is given when we're designing our thinking or designing something new into subtraction, into, you know, taking something out of a situation. And the argument here is that if you are able to introduce a subtractive mentality into your thinking, it's not saying never add anything, but if you're able to also consider subtracting things, you may find that it yields some unexpected and often better results. And we talk about this all the time. There are also some really interesting examples that are given. One of the kind of interesting examples has to do with cinder blocks, right? Cinder block bricks. All the strength of the cinder block is actually in the outside of the cinder block, but originally these didn't have holes in them, right? Now we know cinder blocks have holes in them, and they're lighter and they're easier to carry, and all these great benefits. But there was an architect, a female architect in the States, who said, well, why don't we just punch a couple of holes in these things? It's still just as strong, and it's actually easier to carry, et cetera, et cetera. And now we have, these cinder blocks that we know. I wanted to bring this back. I am going to bring this back to our work and our projects, because, I feel like when we get engaged on giant information management projects, it's often, what are the things that we're going to add to the pile, that we're going to do more than what is necessary in some cases for a successful outcome. And I think coaching folks to think about, okay, well, this whole exercise that we're going through, let's start to think a little bit more about what are the things that we can be doing less of, particularly around the data itself, the data that you're keeping, the metadata that you're keeping. I get really upset in the world of, when we're talking about classifying for records management, I get really upset with file plans that I perceive to be overly complex, that go well beyond what is required by law and by policy. And so what are the things that can be done to subtract and make it easier for people to just get their job done? I'll pause there. I'm not doing a very good book review because, again, I'm only about halfway through the book.
I think that you're doing great. Yeah. And it's funny that you say this, because this is something that's on my mind all the time. And I just think of it from a like Darwinian point of view is everybody thinks so long term. It's like it's when you come from the first, abiogenic self-replicating modules now to the complexity that's sitting here using technology to talk to each other over. It's you think that the goal of systems is to become more complicated and have more capabilities, and it's not actually true. It's the idea, there is no goal, first of all, and the whole idea is just what survives scrutiny, what survives, it's what I'll call extinction events. And ideas fail extinction events, and like technology fails those events, and it's for the better. And you'll notice that like ultimately you end up with something complex because it's just composed of little things that really work, that survived through those extinction events. We don't have newspapers anymore. There was an extinction event for that technology. We don't have all sorts of things that we don't have intellectually. And then, of course, from a biological point of view, that's an easy one to talk about. So, and it's actually part of essentialism. A lot of people feel like essentialism is decide what the most important thing is and then just do it. And that's not it at all. It is, and that's not what people who write the books about essentialism say. It's like they actually say explore deeply all the possibilities and then use that subtraction approach to fail the ones that don't specifically aim you tightest at the target. And once you intellectually get to the ones that aim you tightest at the target, then continuously try to find ones to subtract until you're just focused on the exact outcome that you're trying to get. So I feel like those things are interrelated, and we see it play out in society, in technology, in memetics. Like it's back to Richard Dawkins' idea of ideas spread exactly the same way that genes do. Conceptually,
not actually,
obviously physically. But so anyway, it to me, that's all connected, and subtraction is just such an essential part of any ideation.
Why don't they do it? Why don't
it? They just throw ideas on the pile.
Why is it? Why is that? Do you think? I don't know that we're going to solve that, but it bothers me. I don't know why we don't do that.
I'm gonna posit out that, and if you go back to watching our first recording of this year, we talked about LeBron James and Brian Scalabrine.
Yeah.
And like there's another name out there that we may or not have mentioned, Michael Jordan. You might have heard of him. He was simultaneously like the defensive player of the year and offensive player of the year. So we hold the stack of completeness as the gold standard, the everything everywhere all at once. And I think we just tied it back to the original project planning. We need to do everything in order to be successful.
But you don't.
Which it's like, if you can do it, that's great. If you can be Michael Jordan, that's great. But we decided in that first one, being Brian Scalabrine is pretty good. And I feel like it's the same thing here, is like, if you truly have the budget and all that to do everything, then good for you. Off you go do everything. But you probably don't. So you got to get really good at subtraction. Because if you try to do everything with a non-everything budget, you will definitely underachieve.
It's funny. I'm going to call out another library term here, which is weeding. Librarians love to talk about weeding their collection, which basically means shrinking down the number of books you've got and that kind of thing. We're talking about doing the exact same thing. There's a complete parallel to what we do with redundant, obsolete, and trivial data for our customers, right? It's exactly the same story. So in our business with redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, where it's all about subtracting in order to add. The quality of our enterprise search goes up exponentially when you take all the garbage out of your system. And librarians, I was talking, they call it weeding, right? It's a really common term that's used to talk about getting rid of books that nobody's reading anymore. And it's kind of a constant exercise that librarians are doing. They have finite space in the library. You can only have so many books. So at some point or another, you got to get rid of all those romance novels that are dog-eared and things like that. And, we're doing the same thing, of course, for our customers with redundant, obsolete, and trivial data that people don't need to hang on to anymore. And the connection to this subtraction thinking is that it actually makes something better, like that cinder block we were talking about earlier, that, our search becomes 1,000 times better when you get rid of all the junk and you're not returning junky search results to your users. So look at that. We tied the subtract untapped science of less book, my book report, to information management here at Shiny Docs. So
yeah. I love it, and I think it ties into my next thing. And this is again me picking on a website. Again, I'm not going to say where it is, but it's there's this idea of knowing versus understanding. So we know a bunch of things. And we also, each of us individually, have a variety of things that we truly understand. And knowing and understanding, or believing and understanding, we don't have to get too much into the epistemology of this. But the idea of knowing versus understanding allows you to take actions and do things like subtract. So I'll kind of look at the one that I didn't like. Is like this one says, like, knowing is like building blocks and understanding is arranging and rearranging the blocks, which I don't agree with that. I'm more on the side of like Richard Feynman, who like, lots of people might recognize that. He was part of the Manhattan Project. He was the person called in to do the analysis of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Anyway, very popular scientist. And like his approach was knowing is just, okay, there's something that is an established fact. The world is an oblate spheroid or spherical-ish. And I mean, some people even want to debate that. So it's, however, when you understand, and I don't want to use the word why, because why implies that there's some intent. It's kind of like how that happens. Well, when you understand that there's this physical property of matter where it does attract nearby matter, and then you can get into relativity and how space and time is warped based upon matter. Let's not go into the physics of it, but just know for sure that if each particle attracts each other particle, then the lowest energy state that it's trying to collapse to will be a sphere. And you can do the geometry of that. And then why does gravity work? Go figure it out yourself. But there's this deeper understanding of
why it's a sphere.
That the Earth is a sphere. And then you can kind of understand how that happened, which is, to me, the difference between knowing and understanding. I know a ton of things because of consensus. And then I understand a subset of those things because you acquire the deeper understanding. And I feel like in order to do subtraction, you need a variance of how much do you know. And if you just act on what you know, you might be prone to more mistakes than if you strategically understand particular areas of your business or your task.
I think there's of course, Steve, I just want to jump in here for a second, guys. I think there's a great example of this that kind of ties to both of you when you talk about people who believe in, the flat Earth model and the rule of subtraction and kind of like knowing and understanding. The simple solution, Jason, as you just explained, is the spherical Earth can be explained with a single like scientific model. Like that can explain gravity. It can explain, currents, everything of how our planet works can be explained through one scientific model. But for flat Earth people, they rely on a variety of models that often contradict each other in different ways to explain their theory of how or why they believe the Earth is flat. So I think that's, Davey, what you were saying is that like you don't need a more complex system. You don't need to add more systems to explain why your theory is right, because then what you're seeing is some can be redundant or contradictory to each other. Whereas what we know is kind of like the simplest truth where one model explains everything. And that's, science.
Yeah. And 100%. I was thinking too about linking it back to subtraction and maybe the reticence or the unwillingness that people have to subtract or to bring subtraction into their design thinking on a project or anything like that. And I think you highlighted a little bit, Jason, when you were saying, if there is a gap in your knowledge, or certainly if there's a gap in your understanding of something, to choose to subtract is a risk. It's risky. If I take something away, maybe something will break. It's that classic thing where, you've got an old car and it's basically working. It's like, well, don't touch it. It's working. Like, I'm not going to take anything away. I'm not going to move any parts because the thing is basically working. And if I get in there and subtract something from it, something might stop working. And I wonder whether we all in our projects and in our thinking have this reluctance to take things out because you might make it worse. Whereas if I add something, nobody's going to give you a hard time for that. You're going to say, well, you're just adding something that was already there, and good for you for trying,
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you got very practical with it, Davey, because this is the trick is that we're being very philosophical here. And to just bring it back to a practical example of where this type of thinking works and doesn't work is helpful. Because if you watch Feynman talk about this, it's the idea that knowledge is here's a fact. And then understanding is a philosophy, is the way he described it. And if you take philosophy actually at the academic sense, philosophy, when you learn philosophy, it is how to construct a syllogism. For those of you who don't know what a syllogism is, it's just a well-constructed argument with premises, logical reasoning, and then a conclusion. You do things like identify fallacies, like you identify, am I appealing to what's popular, or these types of things, rather than actually fundamentally understanding. So when you position it that way, there's knowledge of something that you hold to a high level of certainty that it's true, and then understanding that you've actually given it that it's as Steve used the word theory, which I love, and it's kind of a degraded word in our society, when in science it is the highest standard because it has survived the philosophy.
That's right.
It survived the challenge. It survived the testing challenges. It has survived the logical analysis. It is internally consistent. It doesn't have fallacious arguments in it. So the philosophy is really important when you are doing something creative, if you understand the philosophy behind it, rather than just making a statement of cinder block strong.
Right.
Yeah. Sure. You know what I mean? That's a piece of knowledge. Yes. And most cinder block homes don't fall over that easily. But why is it that, or how is it that when you take away stuff out of the middle, it remains just as strong? You have to understand the philosophy of behind the testing of tensile strength of concrete and these types of things. And I mean, it gets complicated, and there's a time and a place for just knowing something, taking it as established fact. And then there's a time and a place when you're being creative. If I'm truly going to subtract something here, maybe I need a deeper level of understanding.
Yeah, and I mean, it also, I look at this is maybe going to go down a bit of a rat hole, but this is also where the scientific method comes into play, where you may have the theories that you're talking about, Steve, but they should be provable and they should be testable, so that if, Jason, you have a great idea about cinder blocks and you do a bunch of tests on it, and you say, Davey, I'm pretty sure these are just as strong as the full size blocks, and they're cheaper to make because I'm not using as much concrete to make them, and they're lighter, they're easier for construction workers to grab with their hands because they got these built-in handles. What do you think? You should be able to give me your whole set of tests, and I should be able to go and make my own cinder blocks and say, gosh, Jason's right. These are better, but it's through testing that, and through so that, you move to a model where that knowledge can become provable, and that's ultimately what makes it knowledge, is that it's accepted because it's provable again and again and again and again and again. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And I'll even I got a science degree, so I'm going to even jump on that in a a very pedantic way,
God, good.
in a actually way.
It's too early in the morning.
Say you can't prove it. All you can do is subtract from it. You can demonstrate things to be incorrect, but you can never really prove something to be
100%.
You know what I mean? You can only provide evidence to support it. There may be a higher level truth that you discover at some point in the future about it. It's like maybe angels make sure that cinder blocks are stronger. You know what I mean? I can't prove that that's not true. However, I can provide supporting evidence to say this is the tensile strength of that, and this is the test that we've done, and all that. So
I'll allow it. That's exactly, and that's actually, it's funny you mentioned that too. And the pedantic part is completely acceptable in this case, because it's also why scientific papers are written the way that they are written. It's like here are the observable facts, or here are the observable metrics that we did when Jason had done his tests, and we did tests that are the following way, and we also observed this. No prejudice, no nothing. This is also what we observed, and coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, it's exactly what Jason observed. That it's the cinder blocks are just as light, they're just as strong. You can put your hands through them. All those things. But you're right. It doesn't say, there's no additional assumption over and above that, or that it's proof, that it's there's no 100% on it.
Supporting evidence.
Right.
Yeah. Supporting evidence to a high level of certainty because it survived the subtractive nature of the evolution of building materials.
Yeah. Super cool. All that to say, good book so far. I actually, my comment about the book, I'm not trying to give it an endorsement. I do think it's probably a stronger article. It's 300 pages of mostly the same point, but nonetheless, good, interesting thinking. And, it's already started to make me think a little bit differently about everything that we do. When I'm trying to solve a problem, maybe to pause for a moment and, obviously you can think about things to add to a situation and things that you can do supplementally to what you're already doing, but maybe I should pause and think about things that could be taken out. And so we'll see how that goes. I'll report back.
I like it. What's your next one, Davey? Does it tie in?
You know what? You're really good at tying things in. I don't know that this one exactly does, but I wanted to bring up something that was in the news just recently, just this past week, in fact, was sort of a series of updates that have happened in California related to the Privacy Rights Act and some of the privacy legislation in California. This whole series of laws passed ultimately by Governor Newsom's government that give to consumers more protection around their own data, their own sensitive data, whether people know this or don't know this. Some of the biggest sort of data warehousing companies in the world are based in California, where large companies gather and store first names, last names, postal addresses, social security numbers, driver's licenses about all kinds of people and all over the world. And then, of course, this data, and that could include all kinds of other stuff as well, geolocation stuff, internet browsing history, all these things. That data is sold all over the world to marketers and all kinds of folks who want data about people. And so you can sell more things to them. There's this series of laws that they've been pushing forward in California, and of course in other jurisdictions in the world. Europe, which is way ahead of North America. Quebec has a comparable, Quebec here in Canada has a comparable law that's coming into place, where it's giving consumers the ability to ask organizations to forget about them, to say, I want you to not only disclose everything you've got about me, but I want you to get rid of it. And so that's all the background, and I promise I'm getting to my actual topic. The topic that I have on this is all great, and I want to celebrate this change in legislation in California. But I also feel like I've seen this movie before. One one of the things that happens when you've worked in tech as long as I have, and Jason, as you have, is that, you start to see some of the same things kind of reoccur. And so when regulations and laws are introduced into specific jurisdictions, in this case, California, they've had historically, they've had the effect of moving the problem somewhere else. And, if you think about the early days of the internet, whether it was, adult or mature content or gambling websites or whatever, what would happen is, they would set up shop somewhere, and then, there'd be some jurisdictional change that would say you can't operate here. So they'd move to Nevada or Kathmandu or somewhere else. So my question for you, Jason, and I don't know, how much thought you've given to this, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. Am I watching the same movie here? Is this the same thing that we saw with gambling sites and with adult content? Are we now seeing this same battleground and same set of behaviors, except for personal private data? Yeah.
Yes. It's interesting that you say that, is that it is, our economy doesn't reward innovation as much as it rewards inefficiency. So it's sadly, I want, it's the thing that motivates me is I want to see, this is one of the few areas where I agree with Elon Musk, is people on Mars, cool. Feels like a good evolution of what humans should be doing. So how do we get there? It's I want to see innovations to, serious innovation to healthcare and these types of things. And let's focus on these. And then you've got the other side of the equation, the realist, it's the person saying, well, who's going to pay for all that? And we're miles away from it. And why should we prioritize that silly stuff? And that's fine. So that's the, in the middle is us. It's just us. So the idea of, it's when you do a financial transaction in FinTrack in Canada is tracking that financial transaction to help the tax man and to make sure that people aren't doing illegal things. You look and you go, that makes complete sense. And it's completely easy to endorse that. And then when you step back a little bit, there's still countries invading other sovereign countries. There are still politicians who want to, best case, embarrass their political rivals, and in worst case, kill them or imprison them. Then you look and go, oh, wow. It's the fact that all this stuff is being tracked can literally result in somebody's death or somebody's public embarrassment or undeserved. So there's this weird push-pull that happens, and this has been happening since, the dawn of, organized civilization, that people have been doing these types of things to each other. And what's the difference now is the speed and efficiency and ease in which we collect the information and disperse the information. It happens so quickly that we don't even think about whether or not we should do it. And that's where this story, again, it's to me, it's playing out differently in a sense, because it's faster and cheaper and more widely available and massive storage and all that more than ever. So it is more dangerous than ever. But I think if your point is that we've seen this story play out over and over again, I think we've seen it play out even before the digital age, where political rivals or whatever, we use their personal information and these types of things, and it all fits together. So, which ends up having a chilling effect on innovation. It has this weird thing where it pushes. I know a lot of gambling sites and other sites are actually hosted in Canada, in near Montreal on Indigenous reserves. And I think it's great because, quite frankly, if people want to gamble, that's fine, as long as, you record your winnings with your taxes and you do it responsibly. That's great. But somehow we've kind of criminalized this thing. So now we've got a population of people who say, well, we don't think it's that bad. We like doing it. We can control it. So we will make it legal in our sovereign area on these Indigenous reserves. I think it's fine. There's no pejorative here. I think it's 100% positive. But this is the weird thing that happens is you get these things with great intent, that are kind of half baked, and then they end up being pushed underground. So anyway, I don't know that I have a point other than to just provide a little bit of analysis on what you said and see if you agree.
And it's you and I are both squarely Gen Xers. Steve, you're much younger than us. But one of the notable things about Gen X is that we get teased for being cynical and, sometimes negative or perceived as being negative. And that's why I was even reluctant to kind of complain about seeing this movie before. But it really feels like this is, as much as we want to applaud some of these choices that Quebec's making for its citizenry, that California is making, that Europe has made. I just feel like it's shuffling. What's that the shell? It's like a little shell game where if you're one of these large organizations that have massive data warehouses of human data. First names, last names, email addresses, fingerprints, retinal scans, geodata, financial transactions, and your business is to sell that data for millions, not individually for millions of dollars, but collectively for millions and millions of dollars to marketing companies and the like. And California introduces a law that says you've got to do a whole bunch of regulatory stuff that's going to be unpleasant and cost you a lot of money and shrink your margins and all these other things. Wouldn't you just say, okay, we'll go to Vegas, then we'll move to Nevada where they're going to let us do whatever we want there until they don't, and then we'll go to some other state. Like it feels like I want to be behind the global approach and the global pursuit of improved individual human privacy, but it feels like this is a tough battle because the problem will just be shifted and shifted and shifted and shifted, and personal data is going to continue to be captured at a dizzying pace. Like you think that a lot of your personal data is captured today in 2024. I can't even imagine what they're going to be capturing about folks 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Yeah, and I get that we're just riffing on this. We mostly have a point. That I think that we're definitely saying that you should have some control over your personal data and other things. In the implementation, I think that's what we're talking about, is the shell game of the implementation of these things is really hard. Like when we look at, I think it was Utah that had a pornography, not a ban, but you had to provide, government issued ID in order to view pornography in particular states. And what happened? The purchase of VPN software skyrocketed. So, I mean, people are like, there's another one, proposed legislation in Florida right now for restricting social media access for people under the age of 16, I believe is where they're drawing the line. And I look at that and I kind of applaud it. I'm like, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that social media as implemented today, while it's great for communication, has some negative psychological effects. So let's truly explore that. So that's great. And what's the actual legislation say is that you literally have to upload your government issued ID in order to participate in social media. Where's the red flag there? Is that, like, do you think that people like Ron DeSantis or whatever are going to perhaps try to suss out who the actual people are who are saying something on Facebook that he doesn't like? Well, now we can just subpoena Facebook and say, give me the addresses.
Who gave me a frowny face? I want to know all the people who gave me a frowny face.
I want to know everybody who gave me a frowny face. Like, it's in that. So it's like, man, that's what I get, is that it is a shell game. It is, okay, now every kid in Florida and every adult who now wants to have the freedom of speech is now going to have to use a VPN in Florida so that they can enjoy the freedoms afforded to them in we're Canadian, they're American, and their constitution. It's, again, I don't know that I have a point per se, other than a critical analysis of the shell game that is the profit motive of knowing everything about everybody versus the practicality and the safety of me being able to safely be anonymous when I am behaving in a reasonably lawful, reasonably progressive way. The trade-offs are enormous, and there's no specific technical solution, and the things that we try are not well implemented.
And the reason why I even bring this topic to the table today is that I think, obviously we at Shiny Docs operate within a little sliver of what we're talking about here, in that we work with organizations that in many cases don't really know what they've got, and we help them find and understand all of the data that they've got, no matter where it lives, including stuff that could be potentially construed as sensitive, private information. And so we have as I say, a little piece to play in the whole thing. But what I'm trying to, and I really view this as important. Really view this as part of my life's work. So, it's something that I really want personally to have a handle on. But what I wanted to, and Steve, I'd love to even hear your thoughts too. But like, do you either of you sense anything changing with people, or are we just all blindly on this path now going, well, yeah, I just assume that all of my personal data has been compromised. I just assume that I'm eventually going to be, identity frauded. I just assume that eventually my credit cards are going to be compromised. What are you going to do? Is that where we're at? Or are we on the cusp of maybe some people taking a step back and say, no, I'm going to start to pull away from the digital world? I again, anecdotally, I've really seen over the last 5 years, which have been revolutionary around the world, I've really seen a lot of people pull away from things like social media, start to unplug themselves from things that traditionally they were absolutely head first into. And I don't know, maybe there'll be a breaking point, and at some point or another, people start to go outside and touch grass and go for walks and that kind of thing. I don't know. But I'm curious to know whether you guys think, we're just we're just on this death march of terrible privacy globally and constantly compromised data, and everybody's cool with that.
Steve?
I think an interesting aspect of that, and I pretty much agree with what you're saying, Davey. I don't think being cynical is necessarily exclusive to a Gen X thing.
We don't have the market cornered up. We just perfected it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think education is an element in that. And I think when it comes to things like, data privacy and like identity theft and stuff like that, a lot of people are, everybody doesn't think it can happen to them until it happens to them, right? Like, I just think it's not necessarily on people's radar for a lot of people. Same with like VPN technology, right? Like, I think when you look at kind of like that, a good example is like the adoption curve, right? Like, I think it's like for the early adopters, people who are already all over VPNs and masking their IPs and protecting their private information, there's a larger portion of like the laggards on that curve that are just kind of like, yeah, like I'm a little bit aware, I hear like news stories about it, but that'll never happen to me. So yeah, I'm not sure how necessarily to approach that problem, but I do think like educating people more about it is kind of important. And to what you're saying also, like, I've seen the same as you, like a lot of people over the last maybe like 4 or 5 years pull away from social media. I myself, I got off Twitter.
Sure, me too.
Last year, I just decided, like social media is kind of just like a toxic cesspool. And like, I don't need that in my life. I'm going to kind of get out of there. So I think more people are coming to the realization to get out and touch grass. But it depends also, everybody's different. I think there's all kinds of like, unknown parameters maybe that affect people's decisions. Maybe it's your profession, your industry, things that require you to be more tuned in to social media or things like that. Like, it's going to be harder for those people to get away. Whereas like someone like me that, from a personal standpoint, I don't need to really have like a huge social media presence. It's easier to be like, well, I'm just going to leave Twitter.
Yeah.
But some people, especially maybe people in like sales, like that's a luxury they don't have or something like that.
Jason?
Yeah. From my perspective, like everything fits together. And what's kind of cool about being in the information business for the last 30 years is that I have a good sense of how it all fits together. And I'm gonna pick on a particular piece of legislation that's come out in Canada. We picked on the Florida for a little bit there, and I'm gonna say that we're not immune to it here in Canada, where where we just passed legislation that bans hacker equipment.
What's that? Like, is that like Doritos or like what's hacker equipment?
No. It's like it's the most popular thing out there is this thing called the Flipper Zero, which is like Wi-Fi plus Bluetooth plus RF signals, and it can do all sorts of cool little tricks of quote unquote hacking things, from like you can change the price of the gas because the unencrypted signal that puts the gas station price up on the pylon on the side of the road is well understood, and it uses a normal protocol that this thing you can just piss with things. You can't actually hotwire most modern vehicles with it, yet it was a reaction to the fact that lots of vehicles are being stolen. So the right response from the government would be, okay, hi Toyota, Honda, Ford, whatever
major manufacturers,
we're going to fine you $1 million a day until you fix your vehicles. So you really strengthen the ability for people to not just download something onto your laptop and then hack the vehicle, because the nature of the legislation, so it's essentially you could actually prosecute anybody who owns a computer, because every computer is a hacking device. So it was silly. So they came up with this idea of banning hacking devices and tougher penalties for people who steal vehicles. The people who steal vehicles already know that they're criminals. Okay. They kind of don't care how long they're going to be in jail. They don't think that they're going to get caught, or they're desperate enough that they're willing to take the risk. So the punishment doesn't matter. And the idea that we can just ban the equipment that they use is silly. Like, it's just dumb. And they don't even use the one thing that was presented as, here's the de facto hacking device, so we're going to ban it, can't even be used for the intended result. And so it all fits together with the privacy piece, in that, like, I mean, you're restricting my liberties, okay? The liberty for me to own some property of something that I want to play with, for a particular purpose of something that you don't like, in this case, car theft. And yet your implementation has no brain. Like, it just has no, it comes back to knowing versus understanding. If you understand the problem, you fix the damn problem. You fix the fact that it's trivially easy to hotwire a Toyota Highlander. And if anybody argues with you and says, no, it's not, they're lying to you. It's trivially easy. It's trivially easy to hack, even rolling codes of your garage door opener. Like, it's like, these things are pretty straightforward to do. So we could hold
manufacturers,
the manufacturers, these to real account, the data brokers to real account. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, here's the reasonable way that people should be allowed to be hacked, or their information to be stolen. Or we can just kind of do the lazy legislative thing and kind of punish criminals or whatever harder, which is just there to satiate people who are complaining about their vehicle being stolen, as opposed to actually fixing the problem. And so to me, that all ties together. So I know that we were talking about,
there's a complete connection
and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it's complete through line.
Well, particularly the parallel that I see in terms of some of the global privacy legislation that we're talking about, this whole right to be forgotten thing, is that it puts the onus almost entirely on the consumer to contact these data brokerages individually, one by one. So let's imagine there are 800 data brokers in California selling your data, which I don't know how many there are, but there's more than one. You have to contact all of them. And I say, can you please remove me do you have any information about me? Oh, you do? Okay. Can you please get rid of it, please? And you have to do that one by one. Now they've introduced, a new bill that I don't believe is passed yet, that basically says that there has to be a mechanism for a citizen of California to do that on one website and then have it fan out to all of the data brokerages, so you don't have to go to each of them individually. But it's to your point about the hacking devices, it's approaching it from the exact wrong end. And you look at that, you're just making connections left and right here. I love it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the last thing I'll mention is like the national do not call.
That's the first thing I thought about. It's the first thing I thought about.
Classic example. It's like, guys, fix hold in our case. And quite frankly, I actually think that from a technological point of view, Rogers, TELUS, Bell, and in the other players that sadly they're not the top three, that I think technologically we do a pretty good job in Canada. We got good connectivity. It's kind of more expensive than the US, but it's fine. We do fine. However, it would be trivially easy to add some opt-in identity verification component to me making a phone call to Davey Slimmin that I can't be spoofed. Like we've had PGP and other types of things for years. However, that's the more calls that you make, the more money the big company makes. And there's 100 other, obvious commercial reasons why I don't want to do that. So government's response, rather than actually fixing the problem and holding the parties to account that can fix the problem. Again, it's not previously I talked about car companies. Now I'm talking about telecommunication companies, by the way, which I'm going to try to praise at the same time. They do a great technological job of actually providing the service. I'm not crapping on them. I'm just saying that there's another thing that needs to be done. And the government takes the lazy approach and says, well, just put your number on this list and now nobody's allowed to call you. But what about everybody who's spoofing numbers? And you know what, the criminals will still criminalize. It's not actually solving the problem. It's just kind of checking we did something about it.
So where we came to is we are seeing the same movie again. This is a movie we've seen before. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Steve? I don't know if I feel better today, but
maybe that was a bummer topic to wrap up on. We should end with puppy dogs and rainbows or something.
Well, I don't know if this can turn on an optimistic note, but I think, when it comes to seeing the same movie, I don't necessarily think you're wrong, but I think it's important that we still have to have some degree of optimism and faith in humanity, that it's kind of like,
that it can get better.
Things can get better. But yeah.
I think first, I know this is in line with what you've said in the past, Jason. There is ample evidence to suggest all over the world that things are getting better. We perceive them as being worse because we're kind of in the moment and we're seeing bad news, because we're being fed it from every direction. But life expectancy globally getting better, health getting better, poverty getting better globally, all of these things, and it's hard to in the moment, sometimes hard to remember that. So,
there's the old saying that humanity will make progress after exhausting all the alternatives, and it's totally true. Is that as long as there's great people working on those problems that you're talking about, we're going to make progress. There's people who will unintentionally stand in the way, who might be the realists. They might actually say, you know what, that thing that you're trying to do is going to be so expensive that it's going to break your company. And they might be right. And that's okay. But at the same time, it's not an excuse not to try. And it's not an excuse not to try to develop a deeper understanding and a better philosophy, value-based philosophy around why we're proceeding the way that we do. So I think there's lots of work that we can do in a positive way.
Okay. My faith in everything has been restored. I feel a lot better.
Very good. I think we did it.
Enterprise Intelligence is a Shiny Docs podcast with Jason Cassidy and Davey Slimmin, produced by Stephen Schuntz. Copyright 2024. If you would like to learn more about how Shiny Docs can make it easy to organize your content, protect your data, and make your users happy, visit shinydocs.com today.